It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp, golden autumn day that usually makes you glad to be alive. But instead of enjoying it, I was standing in my driveway wearing pajama pants and a hoodie, watching a fully uniformed police officer stare in absolute bewilderment at a structure that was, technically speaking, a 2-foot fence attached to a 10-foot wall of dense, aggressive greenery. He scratched his head, tipping his cap back, and looked from the tiny white vinyl fence, which was barely tall enough to trip a toddler, up to the towering emerald wall of arborvitae behind it, and then over to the woman standing on the sidewalk, who looked like she had just swallowed a lemon whole. That was Barbara. Barbara is the president of the Oak Creek Meadows Homeowners Association, the self-appointed guardian of suburban mediocrity, and the reason I was currently explaining to law enforcement why my landscaping wasn't a hostile architectural act, but rather a masterpiece of malicious compliance. So, the officer said, finally breaking the silence that hung heavy over the cul-de-sac. Let me get this straight. She called us because your bushes are too tall. She called you because she says I built an illegal fence. I corrected gently, fighting the urge to smile. But as you can see, officer, my fence is exactly 24 inches high. It's adorable. It's compliant. The trees behind it? Well, that's just nature doing its thing. Barbara let out a sound that was somewhere between a scoff and a hiss, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. It is a spite wall, she shrieked, her voice cracking. It blocks the sidelines. It destroys the community aesthetic. It's a mockery of the rules. I looked at the officer, he looked at me, and in that shared glance, I knew I had won. But to understand why this moment felt better than winning the lottery, why seeing Barbara vibrate with impotent rage was the highlight of my decade, you have to understand how this war started. It didn't start with trees. It started with a cup of coffee and a complete lack of privacy. See, I bought this house in Oak Creek Meadows about 9 months ago. It was a nice place on paper. Good schools, safe streets, the kind of place where people actually wave to you. Or at least, they pretend to. I knew there was an HOA, of course. I signed the papers, skimmed the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and RS, and figured, hey, how bad could it be? Keep the lawn mowed. Don't paint the house neon pink. Bring the trash cans in on time. Reasonable stuff for reasonable people. I was naive. I was so incredibly naive. The problem wasn't the house. It was the backyard. My lot is what they call a fishbowl. My backyard backs right up to the community walking path and, worse, directly faces Barbara's house across the lane. And Barbara, well, Barbara doesn't believe in privacy. She believes in surveillance. Her patio is like a command center. She spends her days sitting there, surrounded by this army of terrifying ceramic cherubs that stare into your soul, watching everything. I couldn't drink a cup of coffee on my deck without feeling eyes on me. I couldn't grill a burger without seeing her make a note on her clipboard about my charcoal usage. But the breaking point was the pool incident. I have a small above-ground pool for my kids, and one Saturday, I was out there floating, just trying to relax, when I heard a voice boom across the yard. Excuse me, Mr. Miller. That floatie is technically a structure if it's left out overnight. That was it. I was done living in a panopticon. I needed a wall. I needed a barrier between my sanity and Barbara's cherubs. So, being a handy guy, I went to the hardware store, loaded up my truck with beautiful, high-grade cedar, and spent 2 weekends building a masterpiece. It was a 6-foot privacy fence. Solid wood, stained a deep, rich mahogany color, sturdy enough to stop a truck. It was glorious. I put the last slat in, wiped the sweat from my brow, and stood back to admire it. The silence was instant. No more eyes. No more cherubs. Just me and my backyard. I felt like a king in his castle. That feeling lasted exactly 48 hours. Monday evening, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my front door. Not mailed, taped. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the stationery of doom. I opened it up, and there it was. Violation Notice Number 001. Dear homeowner, it read in cold, impersonal Times New Roman. It has come to our attention that you have erected a perimeter structure in violation of Section 3.2d of the Oak Creek Meadows CC and RS. All perimeter fencing must be of open style and shall not exceed 48 inches in height. Your structure is 72 inches. You are hereby fined $100, with an additional $50 per day until the structure is brought into compliance. 48 inches. For feet. I stared at the paper. For feet isn't a privacy fence. For feet is a dog run. For feet is a tripping hazard. You can stand flat-footed and look right over a 4-foot fence. It offers zero privacy. It offers zero protection from the gaze of a neighbor who treats the subdivision like her personal ant farm. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. I requested a hearing with the Architectural Review Committee. I thought, surely, if I explain that I sit on a fishbowl lot, that I have kids, that I just want to grill in peace, they'll grant a variance. The meeting was held in the damp basement of the community clubhouse. The committee consisted of 3 people: a guy named Jerry who looked like he was asleep with his eyes open, a woman named Susan who was knitting something that looked like a shroud, and Barbara, sitting at the head of the table like a judge at a murder trial. I laid out my case. I showed pictures. I offered to paint the fence beige if that helped. "Mr. Miller," Barbara said, cutting me off mid-sentence. She didn't look at my photos. She just looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses. "The rules are not suggestions. They are the glue that holds our property values together. If we let you have a 6-foot fence, then everyone will want a 6-foot fence. And then what do we have? A fortress? A prison yard? No. We have an open, welcoming aesthetic here. Section 3.2D is clear. You have 7 days to remedy the violation, or we will hire a contractor to remove it for you and bill you triple the cost." "But Barbara," I pleaded, feeling my dignity slipping away. "I can see your ceramic angels from my kitchen table. They stare at me while I eat cereal." "Then close your blinds," she said coldly. Next item. I walked out of that meeting vibrating with rage. Real, hot, white-knuckle rage. I went home, poured a bourbon, and stared at my beautiful cedar fence. I had 2 choices: keep it and go bankrupt from the fines, or cut it down. That Saturday was the lowest point of my homeownership. I took my reciprocating saw, and with a heavy heart, I sliced 2 feet off the top of every single post. The wood screamed as I cut it. The beautiful privacy panels fell to the grass with a thud. When I was done, I had a 4-foot fence. It looked ridiculous. It looked like a corral for miniature ponies. And sure enough, the moment I finished, I looked across the lane and saw Barbara on her patio, sipping iced tea, giving me a smug little nod. She had won. She had broken me. I was compliant. But here's the thing about compliance. It leaves you with a lot of free time. And here's the thing about rage. If you let it simmer, it turns into focus. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of wine and the 100-page booklet of the CC and RS. I read them. I didn't just skim them. I dissected them. I read every clause, every subsection, every footnote. I was looking for a weapon. I read about the mailboxes. I read about the trash cans. I read about the approved colors of mulch. And then, around 3 a.m., buried in section 4.1a under landscaping and natural barriers, I found it. The Holy Grail. The loophole so wide you could drive a truck through it. The bylaws were obsessed with structures. Fences, sheds, pergolas, they were regulated to the inch. But when it came to plants, the language got lazy. Section 4.1a simply stated, homeowners are encouraged to plant living foliage to enhance the beauty of the property. All species must be selected from the approved plant list to ensure native compatibility. That was it. Living foliage. No height limit. No density limit. Just a list of approved plants. I flipped to the back of the book, to Appendix B, Approved Plant List. I ran my finger down the names: boxwood, holly, juniper, and there it was. Thuja occidentalis, the emerald green arborvitae. Now, if you're not a plant person, let me explain what an emerald green arborvitae is. It's an evergreen. It grows dense, it grows thick, and in the right conditions, it grows fast. And crucially, it can easily reach heights of 12 to 15 feet. My brain started firing like a combustion engine. They limited my fence to 4 feet because it was a structure, but they had no limit on living foliage. I could legally plant a forest on my property line if I wanted to, as long as the trees were on the list. The plan formed in my head instantly. It was petty. It was expensive. It was beautiful. I wasn't just going to build a fence. I was going to build an ecosystem of spite. The next morning, I called a guy. Not a fence guy, a landscape guy. His name was Gus, but everyone called him Green Thumb Gus. He drove a beat-up truck that smelled like fertilizer and diesel, and he looked like a man who had seen things in the trenches of suburban gardening warfare. I walked him into the backyard and pointed to the sad, 4-foot cedar fence. Gus, I said, I have a job for you. It's a little unconventional. Gus spat on the ground. As long as the check clears, I don't care if you want me to plant poison ivy. What's the plan? Okay, I said, laying it out. First, I want you to tear out this wood fence. All of it. And I want you to replace it with white vinyl. Gus looked at me like I was crazy. Vinyl? That looks cheap, man. And the HOA will still cap you at 4 feet. Not 4 feet, I corrected. 2 feet. I want a 24-inch white picket fence. The kind you see in a storybook. Low enough to step over. 2 feet. Gus scratched his beard. What's the point? A rabbit could clear that. The fence isn't for privacy, Gus. The fence is for the letter of the law. Section 3.2d says fences can't exceed 48 inches. It doesn't say they have to be tall. I want to be so compliant it hurts. But I leaned in closer, 12 inches behind that fence, inside my property line. I want you to dig a trench. And in that trench, I want you to plant emerald green arborvitae. But not babies, Gus. I don't want saplings. I want the big boys. I want the 6-footers, maybe 8-footers if you can find them. And I want them planted tight. I want a wall of green so dense a mosquito couldn't fly through it. Gus looked at the property line. He looked at Barbara's house across the lane. He looked at the bylaws I was holding. And then, slowly, a grin spread across his face, revealing a gold tooth. You're building a loophole, he whispered reverently. I'm building a nature preserve, I said. Can you do it? Buddy, Gus beamed. I can get you trees that are 10 feet tall by Tuesday. It'll cost you, though. Heavy machinery, mature stock. It ain't cheap. I don't care, I said. Take my money. Tuesday came. The day of reckoning. Gus didn't just bring a truck. He brought a convoy. A flatbed trailer rolled down the quiet street, carrying 20 massive arborvitae trees, their root balls wrapped in burlap, looking like missiles ready for launch. Behind it came a mini excavator. The noise drew the neighborhood out immediately. Curtains twitched. Garage doors opened. And of course, Barbara came out. She marched across the street, her radar locking onto the activity, sensing a disturbance in the force. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, hands on her hips. Mr. Miller, what is this commotion? Heavy machinery is only allowed for major construction. Just doing some gardening, Barbara? I yelled over the roar of the excavator. Beautifying the neighborhood. You're always talking about enhancing the aesthetic, right? She had the trees on the flatbed. They were huge. They were monstrous. Those are very large bushes, she said suspiciously. Emerald green arborvitae, I shouted back cheerfully. Section 4.1a, Appendix B, Approved Species. She narrowed her eyes, scanning for a violation, but she couldn't find one yet. She watched as Gus's crew ripped out the cedar fence. She watched, confused, as they installed the tiny, knee-high white vinyl picket fence. It looked ridiculous. It looked like a border for a dollhouse. That fence, she shouted, pointing. It serves no purpose. It marks the boundary. I replied, and it's 24 inches. Well under the maximum. Then the planting began. The excavator dug a trench right behind the tiny fence. Then, the crew hoisted the trees. These things were beasts. 10 feet tall, thick, lush, and dark green. They dropped them into the trench one by one, creating an instant, impenetrable wall. As the wall grew, blocking out the view of the street, blocking out the view of her patio, blocking out the sun itself, I saw the realization hit Barbara's face. She wasn't looking at a garden. She was looking at a fortress. She was looking at her own irrelevance. She ran back to her house. I knew what she was doing. She was getting the bylaws. By the time the last tree was tamped down, the police cruiser was pulling up. Which brings us back to where we started. The officer, Officer Davis, was a good guy. He listened to Barbara rant about spite bushes and unsafe wildlife corridors. He listened to her claim that the trees were a structural hazard. Then he turned to me. Sir, Officer Davis said, can you show me where it says you can't plant these? I handed him the laminated copy of Section 4.1a. I had highlighted the approved plant list in neon yellow. Officer, these are living plants. The bylaws regulate fence height. They regulate shed height. But as you can see, the text is silent on the height of approved vegetation. I'm just a guy who loves nature. Officer Davis looked at the document. He looked at Barbara. Ma'am, he's right. Unless there's a city ordinance about tree height, which there isn't, unless they interfere with power lines, which these don't, this is a civil matter. Actually, it's not even a matter. It's just landscaping. But he did it to mock me. Barbara screamed, losing her composure entirely. Look at that tiny fence. It's an insult. The fence is compliant. Officer Davis shrugged. Ma'am, stop calling 911 because you don't like your neighbor's trees. Next time, I'm citing you for misuse of emergency services. He got in his car and drove away. The silence that followed was delicious. I stood behind my 10-foot wall of green. I couldn't see Barbara. I couldn't see her cherubs. I couldn't see her scowl. I could only hear the wind rustling through the cedar branches. Have a nice day, Barbara, I called out from behind the green curtain. I didn't hear a response, just the slamming of her front door. But the war wasn't quite over. Barbara wasn't the type to give up after one defeat. 2 days later, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. The agenda item was simply review of landscape anomalies at 742 Oak Street. The community center was packed. Word had spread about the Great Green Wall, and people wanted to see the show. I walked in with my binder, feeling like a gladiator entering the arena. Barbara stood at the podium, projecting a picture of my house onto the screen. It looked hilarious, this tiny white fence dwarfed by the massive hedge. This, Barbara declared, her voice trembling with righteous indignation, is a loophole that threatens the integrity of our community. If we allow this, what's next? A jungle? We must vote to sanction Mr. Miller and force the removal of this monstrosity. She opened the floor for comments. I stood up. Hi, everyone, I said, looking around the room. I saw faces I recognized. Neighbors who had been fined for leaving a bike out, for having the wrong color mulch, for breathing too loudly. Look, we all know the rules. I followed them. I built a compliant fence. I planted compliant trees. Barbara here is mad because she can't see into my backyard anymore. She's mad because she can't control what she can't see. I paused for effect. But here's the thing. If you vote to make me take these down, you're setting a precedent. You're saying that the HOA can dictate how tall your flowers grow. You're saying they can come into your yard and measure your hydrangeas. Is that what you want? Do you want more rules? The room went quiet. I could see the gears turning. Nobody liked the HOA. They tolerated it. But giving Barbara the power to measure trees? That was a bridge too far. I moved to dismiss the complaint, said old Mr. Henderson from down the block. The boy followed the rules. Leave him alone. Seconded, said the lady who had been fined for her bird bath. Barbara looked around the room, panic rising in her eyes. But the uniformity, the sightlines, all in favor of dismissing. Mr. Henderson asked. Every hand in the room went up, except Barbara's. The meeting adjourned in 5 minutes. It was a rout. As I walked out, people were patting me on the back. Green Thumb, Gus had become a local legend. The aftermath was better than I could have imagined. My backyard is a sanctuary now. It's quiet. It's private. I can swim in my pool without judgment. I can grill without fear. The wall of arborvitae has grown another foot since then, knitting together into a solid, lush barrier that blocks out the world. But the best part? The ripple effect. A month after my victory, I was driving down the street, and I saw a truck parked at the Petersons' house. It was Gus. He was unloading a dozen emerald green arborvitae. Then the Johnsons did it. Then the Smith family. Slowly, over the last 6 months, Oak Creek Meadows has changed. The open, fishbowl sightlines that Barbara loved so much are disappearing. In their place, walls of beautiful, approved, 10-foot greenery are popping up everywhere. The neighborhood is becoming a forest. People are reclaiming their privacy, one tree at a time. Barbara still walks her patrols. She still carries her clipboard. But now, when she walks down the street, she's walking through a canyon of trees. She can't see into the yards. She can't report the unauthorized floaties or the unapproved grills because she can't see them. We have blinded the panopticon with nature. I still keep the tiny, 24-inch white fence painted and pristine. I wipe it down every week. It's not a fence anymore. It's a monument. A monument to the day the little guy read the fine print and won. It cost me about $5,000 to install that hedge. It was the most expensive landscaping I've ever done. But every morning, when I sit on my back deck with my coffee, staring at a wall of beautiful green instead of Barbara's scowling face, I know one thing for sure. It was worth every single penny. So here's my question to you guys. Was I too petty? Should I have just accepted the 4-foot fence and lived with the lack of privacy? Or is there a certain moral obligation to fight tyranny, even when that tyranny comes in the form of a homeowners association president. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you're living in an HOA right now, do yourself a favor, go read the bylaws. Read the section on living foliage. You never know what freedom you might find buried in the fine print. Thanks for listening. Keep your fences low, your hedges high, and your neighbors guessing. Catch you on the next one.